fates worse than death. Much worse. And for a Space Marine dreadnought, those fates begin the moment they fall into the hands of the Dark Eldar. Imagine, if you will, that you are a warrior who has already died once. Your body was shattered beyond all recognition in some forgotten battle, reduced to little more than a torso and a head suspended in amniotic fluid. The apothecaries of your chapter salvaged what they could, sealing your broken form inside a walking tomb of adamantium and ceramite. You became a dreadnought, trading the mortality of flesh for an existence measured in centuries of endless warfare and dreamless sleep. It's a half-life at best, but it's service to the Emperor, and service is all you've ever known. Now imagine that your dreadnought chassis lies disabled on some distant battlefield, its systems failing, your connection to the war machine growing dim. You watch through failing optics as Xenos warriors approach, their movements too quick, too precise. They're not here to destroy you, they're here to take you. And in that moment, as alien hands begin working on your hull with tools that shouldn't exist, you realize something that fills you with a horror greater than any you've known in centuries of war. Your nightmare is just beginning. This is the reality that awaits any dreadnought unfortunate enough to be captured by the Drukhari, the Dark Eldar of Komorrach. And what happens next makes death seem like a mercy you'll spend eternity begging for. The Dark Eldar, or Drukhari as they call themselves, are a race born from the ashes of catastrophe. 10,000 years ago, the ancient Eldar Empire collapsed in an event so terrible that it literally tore a hole in reality itself. The excessive pleasures and dark pursuits of the Eldar had grown so extreme, so utterly depraved, that they birthed a chaos god from the collective psychic echoes of their civilization. Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, came screaming into existence, and in that moment of birth, consumed the souls of trillions of Eldar across the galaxy. But some survived. Those who had already fled to the webway, that labyrinthine network of tunnels between real space and the warp, found themselves beyond Slaanesh's immediate grasp. These refugees gathered in Komorrach, the greatest of the webway's port cities, and there they discovered a terrible truth. Even in this sanctuary, Slaanesh was slowly draining their souls. Every moment of their existence, the Dark Prince was feeding on their essence, drawing them inexorably toward an eternity of torment in the warp. The Eldar of Komorrach could have chosen different paths. They could have embraced the discipline and sacrifice of their Craftworld cousins, learning to contain their souls in spirit stones. They could have rejected their old ways entirely, as the Exodites did. But the denizens of Komorrach chose a third option, one that would define them for the next 10 millennia. They discovered that by inflicting suffering on others, by feeding on the pain and terror of lesser beings, they could sustain themselves. They could replenish what Slaanesh was stealing, staving off damnation for another day, another year, another century. And so the Dark Eldar were born, a civilization that had elevated torture to an art form, slavery to an economic system, and suffering to a currency more valuable than any material wealth. From their hidden city in the webway, they launched lightning raids on the worlds of real space, striking without warning through dimensional portals that can open anywhere, at any time. They come for slaves primarily, for living beings whose pain can sustain them, but they also come for sport, for the sheer exhilaration of the hunt, and sometimes they come for prizes. A Space Marine dreadnought is perhaps the greatest prize they could claim. To understand why, you need to understand what the Dark Eldar crave above all else: new experiences in suffering. They've been perfecting the art of torture for 10,000 years. They've inflicted every conceivable form of agony on every species in the galaxy. Human victims scream much as they always have. Orc physiology limits the complexity of their pain responses. Tau are interesting but ultimately predictable. But a Space Marine, and especially a dreadnought, that's something special. The Dark Eldar don't raid for simple pleasure, though pleasure is certainly part of it. They raid because they must. Every day they don't feed on suffering is a day closer to the moment when Slaanesh will finally claim them. It's biological necessity twisted into sadistic art. Their entire civilization depends on a constant supply of victims. And the arenas of Komorragh, the torture chambers of the Homunculi, the private collections of the Archons, they all hunger for fresh subjects. The slave markets of the Dark City trade in sentient beings the way other civilizations trade in grain or ore, and business is always good. But in this economy of agony, not all victims are created equal. A space marine represents months, perhaps even years of entertainment. Their enhanced physiology, designed to help them survive the most extreme combat conditions, means they can endure far more than any normal human before their bodies finally give out. Their mental conditioning, the hypno-indoctrination and psycho-conditioning that makes them the Emperor's finest warriors, means they resist mental breaking far longer than civilians. They're the ultimate challenge for a Dark Elder torturer, the canvas on which the most elaborate works of suffering can be painted. And a dreadnought. A dreadnought is a space marine who has already been broken once, who has survived injuries that would kill even their enhanced brethren, and who has been given a second life in a walking war machine. Inside that armored sarcophagus is a warrior with centuries of experience, tactical knowledge that could fill libraries, and a will that has already proven unbreakable. To the Homunculi of Komorragh, those insane flesh sculptors who rule the covens beneath the Dark City, a dreadnought isn't just a prize. It's the masterpiece they've been waiting for their entire existence to create. The question isn't whether the Dark Eldar would want to capture a dreadnought. The question is, what happens when they succeed? Before we can understand the horror that awaits a captured dreadnought, we need to understand what a dreadnought truly is. Because contrary to what many Imperial citizens believe, a dreadnought is not simply a large suit of armor or a robot. It's something far more complex and far more tragic. A dreadnought begins with a space marine who has been mortally wounded in battle. Not killed outright, that would be too clean, too final, but injured so severely that even the legendary regenerative capabilities of Astartes' physiology cannot save them. We're talking about injuries that would vaporize a normal human, wounds that leave the marine with perhaps a torso, maybe parts of their limbs, and a head that still contains a functioning brain. The kind of damage that means they'll be dead within minutes or hours at most, no matter how many organs their enhanced biology can do without. When such a warrior is found on the battlefield, the chapter faces a choice. They can grant them the Emperor's peace, a quick death that allows their gene seed to be recovered and their service to be honored. Or, if the marine in question is deemed valuable enough, if they possess tactical knowledge or experience that the chapter cannot afford to lose, they can offer them what is framed as the highest honor a space marine can receive: internment within a dreadnought. The process of creating a dreadnought is not for the faint of heart. It begins with the apothecaries and tech marines stripping away everything that isn't absolutely necessary for life. Arms, legs, much of the torso, anything too damaged or unnecessary is removed. What remains is reduced to its most essential components: the brain, the spinal column, some critical organs, and whatever flesh is needed to keep those organs functioning. This biological core is then hardwired into a sarcophagus, an armored life support system that will keep the marine alive indefinitely. The sarcophagus is filled with amniotic fluid, a thick oil-like substance that sustains the body, fills the lungs, and maintains the temperature at just above freezing. The cold slows everything down, preserving what little flesh remains while the machine does the work of living. Neural interfaces, called mind impulse units, are surgically implanted directly into the brain and spinal cord, creating a connection between the marine's consciousness and the dreadnought's systems that is so complete, so total, that the line between man and machine becomes almost impossible to distinguish. When the process is complete, this sarcophagus is installed into the chest cavity of a dreadnought chassis, a walking war machine that stands 3 to 4 times the height of a man and weighs several tons. The chassis is equipped with weapons that would normally require a crew to operate, power sources that could run a small city, and armor thick enough to withstand direct hits from anti-tank weapons. Through the Mind Impulse unit, the entombed Marine can control all of this as if it were their own body, moving with surprising agility despite the dreadnought's massive size. To the outside observer, a dreadnought is an awe-inspiring sight. It strides across the battlefield with purpose and power, its weapons speaking death to the enemies of the Emperor, its mere presence inspiring nearby Space Marines to greater acts of valor. It's easy to see why the Imperium frames internment as an honor, as a way for a hero to continue their service beyond the normal limits of mortality. But the reality inside the sarcophagus is very different. Imagine being reduced to a brain in a jar, stripped of every physical sensation you once knew. You can't feel the ground beneath your feet because you have no feet. You can't feel the weight of a weapon in your hands because you have no hands. You can't feel the rush of air in your lungs because your lungs are filled with cold fluid. Every sense you once had has been replaced by mechanical approximations, data feeds and sensor readouts that your brain struggles to interpret as reality. The Mind Impulse unit allows you to move the dreadnought's limbs, but it's not the same as moving your own body. It's more like operating a vehicle, except the vehicle is supposed to be you, and you can't ever get out. The psychological toll of this existence cannot be overstated. Many newly interred dreadnoughts go through a period of extreme disorientation and distress as they struggle to accept their new reality. Some rage against their confinement, their fury only barely contained by the restraints and neural limiters built into their sarcophagi. Others fall into deep depressions, spending their first few awakenings in near catatonic states. A few, a very unlucky few, simply go mad, their minds unable to reconcile the disconnect between what they once were and what they've become. The chapter deals with this by keeping dreadnoughts in stasis between battles. When not needed, the sarcophagus is sealed in a stasis vault deep within the chapter's fortress monastery, where the Marine inside is placed in a state of suspended animation. They don't dream in stasis. They don't think or feel or experience the passage of time. They simply cease to exist in any meaningful sense until the chapter awakens them for battle or to seek their counsel. This might seem like a mercy, but it comes with its own horror. Every time a dreadnought awakens, they find that decades or even centuries have passed. The world they knew is gone. Their battle brothers are long dead. The enemies they once fought have been replaced by new threats. Even the chapter itself may have changed beyond recognition, new traditions replacing old ones, new heroes taking the place of those the dreadnought once served alongside. They are strangers in their own chapter, living relics from a time that no longer exists. And slowly, inexorably, the dreadnought begins to lose themselves. The extended periods in stasis, the neural stress of interfacing with the machine, the sheer psychological weight of existence spanning centuries, all of it takes a toll on the mind. Memories fade, emotions dull. The personality that once defined the Marine begins to erode, worn away like stone underwater, until what remains is more machine than man. Some dreadnoughts last millennia before this final dissolution occurs. Others lose themselves much faster, but all of them, eventually, reach a point where the person they once were is gone, leaving only the dreadnought, still functioning, still fighting, but hollow. This is what the chapter doesn't tell newly interred Marines. They speak of honor and continued service, of the privilege of fighting for the Emperor for centuries to come. They don't mention the isolation, the slow loss of identity, the way each awakening takes you further from everything you once knew. They can't, because if they did, no Marine would choose internment. They would choose death instead, the clean finality of it, over an existence that is neither truly living nor truly dying. And yet, despite all of this, despite the horror of existence as a dreadnought, there are moments when it is worthwhile. Moments when the Marine within remembers why they chose this path, or had it chosen for them. when they stride into battle alongside their brothers, when their weapons turn the tide of a desperate fight, when their centuries of experience allows them to see a solution that no one else could have found. In those moments, purpose returns. In those moments, the dreadnought remembers what it means to serve. But what happens when those moments are taken away? What happens when the dreadnought falls not in glorious battle, not fighting to the last against impossible odds, but helpless, disabled, and at the mercy of an enemy that knows exactly what kind of prize they've found? That's when the true horror begins. The capture of a dreadnought by Dark Eldar is not a common occurrence, but it's not unheard of either. The Drukhari have been raiding real space for 10,000 years, and in that time, they've refined their tactics to an art form. They know what they're looking for, and more importantly, they know how to take it. Dark Eldar raids follow a predictable pattern. They strike from the webway, dimensional portals opening without warning in the midst of populated areas, military installations, or battlefields. The raiders pour through on their anti-gravity skimmers, raiders and venoms, carrying squads of Kabbalite warriors, Wyches, and sometimes the dreaded grotesques and pain engines of the homunculi covens. They move with inhuman speed, their reflexes enhanced by the combat drugs that flow through their veins and the pure adrenaline rush of the hunt. The objective is never to fight a prolonged engagement. Dark Eldar are fragile compared to many of the galaxy's warrior races. Their bodies, for all their speed and grace, lack the durability of orcs, the armor of space marines, or even the numbers of Imperial Guard. They compensate for this with speed, surprise, and overwhelming initial violence. They hit hard, they hit fast, and they're gone before any organized resistance can form. Those they want dead are killed with brutal efficiency. Those they want alive are paralyzed with specialized toxins, wrapped in cocoons of webbing, or simply grabbed by the torture devices built into their vehicles and dragged screaming back through the portal. But capturing a dreadnought requires a different approach. You can't just shoot it with a splinter rifle and hope the poison works. The marine inside is protected by feet of adamantium and ceramite, sealed in an environment suit that makes them immune to biological and chemical weapons. You can't overpower it physically, not without risking damage to the sarcophagus inside, which would ruin the prize. And you can't take your time, because dreadnoughts, even when alone, are among the most dangerous weapons in the Space Marine arsenal. Left to its own devices, a functioning dreadnought can hold off an entire raiding party long enough for reinforcements to arrive. So the Dark Eldar have developed specific tools and tactics for dealing with armored vehicles and war machines. Chief among these are haywire weapons, esoteric devices that emit pulses of electromagnetic energy designed to disrupt and disable mechanical systems. A haywire bomb going off near a dreadnought sends cascading pulses through its systems, shorting out servo motors, disrupting power conduits, and most critically, severing the neural connections between the sarcophagus and the chassis. For the Marine inside, this is a moment of sudden, complete helplessness. One moment, they're fighting, their weapons speaking thunder, their massive form crushing enemies beneath its feet. The next, everything goes dark. The connection to the dreadnought's limbs is severed. The weapon systems go offline. The optical feeds cut out. They're trapped inside their sarcophagus, blind, paralyzed, and utterly at the mercy of whatever's outside. This is the moment the Dark Eldar have been waiting for. Specialized salvage teams move in, warriors trained in the techno-arcana necessary to extract high-value prizes intact. They work quickly, attaching grappler claws to the disabled dreadnought, hooking it up to the anti-gravity systems of their transport vehicles. The whole process takes mere minutes. By the time any Space Marine reinforcements arrive, all they find is scorch marks and the tracks where their ancient brother was dragged away. The journey back to the webway portal is perhaps the last chance for escape, but it's a slim chance at best. The Marine inside the sarcophagus is fully conscious, but completely unable to affect what's happening. They can hear the sounds of the battlefield growing distant, replaced by the alien sounds of Dark Eldar technology and speech. They might feel the lurch as their entire chassis is lifted onto a transport platform. They definitely feel the moment when they're dragged through the portal into the webway itself, a sensation that survivors describe as being turned inside out, while simultaneously being in too many places at once. And then they're gone from real space entirely, pulled into a dimension where the laws of physics operate differently, where the light has a strange quality that doesn't quite match reality, where the very air seems to whisper with echoes of ancient atrocities. The journey through the webway to Komarach can take hours or days depending on the route, time that the imprisoned Marine spends in total darkness, unable to do anything but wait and wonder what fate awaits them. There have been historical examples of dreadnoughts falling into enemy hands, though records are understandably sparse and often classified by the chapters involved. The Salamanders chapter, for instance, has fought multiple battles specifically to recover captured battle brothers from the Dark Eldar, including the famous assault on Komarach itself when an entire strike cruiser was captured and dragged into the Dark City. While that particular incident ended with the Salamanders successfully raiding Komarach to recover their brothers, not every such mission succeeds. Some dreadnoughts are lost forever, their fate unknown to their chapters, their final days spent in the torture chambers of the Dark City. The Imperium's response to such captures is telling. Standard protocol for when a dreadnought is captured by Xenos is to immediately dispatch recovery teams if at all possible. If recovery is not feasible within a limited time frame, the chapter is supposed to declare the dreadnought lost and perform rites of mourning for the fallen hero. In practice, many chapters refuse to give up so easily. They will hunt for years, sometimes decades, following every scrap of intelligence, every whisper of where their lost brother might be, hoping against hope that they can find and recover them before it's too late. It's almost always too late. The webway is a place that defies easy description. It's not quite the warp, though it exists in the spaces between real space and that chaotic dimension. It's not quite a physical location, though you can walk through it and travel its passages. The ancient Eldar created it as a network of tunnels that would allow them to traverse the galaxy without exposing themselves to the predations of the warp, and it served that purpose well for millions of years. But like everything else the Eldar touched, it has become twisted and dangerous in the ages since their empire's fall. For a captured dreadnought being transported through the webway toward Komarach, the journey is a sensory nightmare. Even with their external sensors disabled, the sarcophagus itself picks up emanations from outside. Strange lights that seem to penetrate the armor, sounds that shouldn't be able to reach them, and worst of all, a sense of wrongness, of being in a place that was never meant to contain them, that their very presence violates in some fundamental way. The Dark Eldar transport moves quickly through passages that twist and turn in ways that make no geometric sense. The raiders might take shortcuts through sub-dimensions where hours pass in minutes, or they might deliberately take longer routes to avoid territories claimed by their rivals in the Dark City. The webway is not safe, even for its primary inhabitants. Demons lurk in broken sections, waiting to ambush the unwary. Craftworld Eldar sometimes patrol certain passages, attacking Dark Eldar on sight. And there are things in the deep webway, entities that predate even the Eldar's ancient civilization, things that hunger for any soul foolish enough to wander into their domain. But for all its dangers, the webway is also the Dark Eldar's greatest advantage. From Komarach, they can reach almost anywhere in the galaxy through the network of portals and passages. They can raid a world on the Eastern Fringe, retreat back to the Dark City, and be raiding another world in the Ultima Segmentum before Imperial authorities even know the first attack happened. This mobility, combined with their speed and the element of surprise, makes them almost impossible to defend against and even harder to retaliate against. How do you launch a counterstrike against an enemy whose city exists in a dimension you can't reach? As the captured dreadnought's journey continues, they begin to notice changes. The quality of the darkness shifts. The sounds of the webway itself, that strange whisper song that seems to emanate from the very walls, grows louder and more complex. And then, finally, they feel it. The presence of Komaruk itself, a weight on their consciousness that grows stronger with every passing moment, like approaching a black hole made of suffering and malice. The first glimpses of Komaruk, even for a dreadnought with disabled visual senses, are unforgettable. The dark city announces itself through every sense at once. The temperature drops precipitously as the raiders enter the outer districts, the cold so profound it seems to leach warmth from the very soul. The air, even filtered through the sarcophagus's life support, carries scents that should not exist. Burning flesh mixed with exotic perfumes, ozone from ancient power systems, and underneath it all, the copper-iron stench of blood so old and so abundant, it's become part of the atmosphere. Komaruk is not one city, but thousands, an impossible metropolis that defies every law of architecture and physics. Spires rise higher than mountains, their tops lost in the perpetual twilight that passes for sky in this realm. Buildings hang from the underside of floating platforms, their lights casting strange shadows in directions light should not fall. Streets twist at angles that hurt to look at, creating shortcuts through space itself that allow travel from one district to another with a single step through a dimensional gateway. The entire city is lit by the Ilmea, the black suns, dying stars that the ancient Eldar captured at the height of their technological prowess and installed within sub-realms of the webway to provide light and power to Komaruk. But these are not the warm, life-giving stars of real space. They're red giants, on the verge of collapse, their light a sickly crimson that bathes everything in a color reminiscent of blood. In this light, the spires of Komaruk cast shadows that seem alive, that move independently of the structures that create them. And in those shadows, things lurk that even the Dark Eldar fear. The architecture itself is deliberately hostile, designed not for comfort or efficiency, but to instill awe and terror in equal measure. Every surface is decorated with scenes of torture and debauchery, carved into the stonework or projected as hololithic displays. Gargoyles that might or might not be alive leer from buttresses. Chains hang from every overhang, sometimes empty, sometimes bearing cages containing still living prisoners who are displayed as decoration. And everywhere there are spikes, on walls, on doors, on the vehicles that flow through the air lanes, each one bearing the unmistakable stains of use. As the raiding party approaches the district where they will deliver their prize, the dreadnought might catch glimpses through brief activations of external sensors. They see platforms where gladiatorial games are in progress, the arenas packed with screaming crowds as slaves fight for the entertainment of the masses. They see market squares where beings of every species are bought and sold like cattle, their cries lost in the cacophony of haggling and cruel laughter. They see the high spires where the Archons dwell, those who rule the cabals and command the raiding fleets, each spire a fortress and palace combined, each one competing to outdo the others in displays of wealth and power. And then, as the transport begins to descend toward the lower levels, toward the foundational layers, where the oldest and darkest parts of Komaruk exist, the dreadnought realizes where they're being taken. Down to the subterranean districts, down to where the Homunculi dwell. The Homunculi covens occupy territories deep beneath the Dark City proper, in vast cavern systems that predate Komaruk itself. These are the mad scientists of Dark Eldar society, the flesh sculptors whose skills are necessary for the survival of their species, but whose presence is disturbing even to other Dark Eldar. They've been practicing their art for 10,000 years, and in that time, they've achieved a mastery of biology and pain that would be impressive if it weren't so utterly horrifying. A homunculus is ancient beyond measure. Most are survivors from before the fall, having extended their lives through countless regenerations and modifications to their own bodies. They no longer resemble the Eldar they once were. Their forms are twisted, elongated, decorated with additional limbs and organs harvested from other species or grown in their laboratories. They wear masks of iron and bronze, though whether these are truly masks or have been grafted directly onto their faces is anyone's guess. Some have replaced their hands with surgical implements, choosing to make themselves living tools of their craft. The process of becoming a homunculus is not something anyone fully understands, least of all other Dark Eldar. Some were torture technicians in the old Eldar Empire, practicing their art even before the fall made it a necessity. Others are Dark Eldar who, after millennia of life, find that they've grown bored with everything except the science of suffering and choose to join a coven to learn its secrets. The transformation, whatever it entails, changes them fundamentally. They lose what little empathy Dark Eldar possess, becoming beings who view all other creatures purely as raw materials for their experiments. To understand why a dreadnought is such a prize for a homunculus, you need to understand what drives these creatures. It's not just sadism, though that's certainly part of it. The homunculi are artists, in their own twisted way. They see flesh as a canvas, pain as a pigment, and suffering as the brushstroke that creates their masterpieces. They're scientists too, constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible, discovering new ways to modify bodies, new methods to extract and prolong agony, new techniques to deny death its ultimate victory. A Space Marine represents a unique challenge. Their enhanced physiology, the results of genetic modification and surgical implantation that begins when they're recruited as children, makes them resistant to many forms of torture that would quickly break a normal human. Their extra organs, their enhanced bone structure, their ability to enter suspended animation or shut down pain responses through sheer mental discipline, all of these create obstacles that a homunculus must overcome. It's like trying to sculpt with adamantium instead of clay. Difficult, certainly, but when successful, the results are so much more impressive. A dreadnought takes this challenge to another level entirely. Here is a Space Marine who has already survived what should have been fatal injuries, whose will has already proven strong enough to endure internment in a walking tomb, whose mind has potentially survived for centuries or even millennia. They're a puzzle box of suffering, each layer more complex than the last, and solving that puzzle, breaking that will, extracting secrets from that ancient mind, that's the kind of challenge that would make a homunculus abandon every other project they're working on. The covens themselves are organized communities, though the word community barely applies to beings this solipsistic and cruel. Each coven occupies a domain, a territory that includes laboratories, torture chambers, regeneration vaults, and storage areas for raw materials. Some of these domains are labyrinths of mirrors, where nothing is quite as it seems. Others are spiral pits, with narrow walkways over drops that descend into darkness. A few are even constructed from living flesh, entire structures grown from the bodies of slaves, kept alive and aware as their forms are shaped into walls and floors and ceilings. Within these domains, the homunculi practice their art. They create new life through vat-grown technology, accelerating embryos to full growth in months rather than years. They modify their servants, the racks, transforming Dark Eldar volunteers into something stronger, more resilient, and utterly loyal to their masters. They build pain engines, semi-sentient constructs of flesh and metal that serve as both guardians and mobile torture chambers. And they experiment, constantly, on the endless stream of slaves that flow into their laboratories from the markets above. The tools of a homunculus are varied and horrifying. Some are recognizable as surgical instruments, scalpels and saws and clamps, though the purposes they serve are far from medical. Others are more esoteric, devices that stimulate specific nerve clusters, machines that can extend a moment of pain over subjective hours, drugs that enhance consciousness while removing the body's ability to enter shock. There are tools that can keep a subject alive indefinitely, sustaining their body through artificial means even as it's systematically disassembled. And there are tools that work on the mind, that can extract memories, alter perceptions, or simply drive the subject into carefully calibrated states of madness. For the Dark Eldar as a species, the homunculi provide essential services. They're the ones who regenerate fallen warriors, regrowing bodies from preserved tissue samples. They're the ones who create new Dark Eldar through vat growth technology, since natural birth among their kind is extremely rare. They're the ones who provide the exotic body modifications that Archons and their favored warriors desire, adding new limbs, enhancing reflexes, or grafting weapons directly onto bodies. In return, the homunculi demand payment, usually in slaves, sometimes in favors, and always in the freedom to pursue their research without interference. A cabal that captures a dreadnought would almost certainly bring it to a homunculus, partly because extracting the marine from the sarcophagus requires technical expertise that few others possess, but mostly because the homunculus would pay handsomely for such a prize. The exchange might involve years of regeneration services for the cabal's warriors, a discount on pain engines for their fleet, or simply a massive payment in slaves that the cabal can then sell or use as they see fit. For the homunculus, no price is too high for a specimen this rare and valuable. And once the dreadnought is delivered to the homunculus's domain, once it's sealed in one of those subterranean laboratories where screams echo for eternity and nothing ever truly dies, the real horror begins. The first challenge a homunculus faces when presented with a captured dreadnought is technical. The sarcophagus that holds the Space Marine is a marvel of imperial engineering, constructed by tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus and protected by layers of security measures, encryption, and mechanical safeguards. It's designed to withstand battlefield damage, to remain sealed even if the dreadnought chassis is destroyed, and most importantly, to prevent anyone from accessing the Marine inside without proper authorization. Under normal circumstances, attempting to open a dreadnought sarcophagus without the correct access codes and tools would be nearly impossible. The Adeptus Mechanicus guards its secrets jealously, and the rituals involved in properly unsealing a sarcophagus are known to only a handful of tech priests. There are mechanical locks that require specific tools to manipulate, digital security systems that will trigger self-destruct protocols if tampered with incorrectly, and in some cases, purity seals blessed by chaplains that are believed to provide spiritual protection against corruption. But the homunculi are not trying to work within imperial protocols. They don't care about preserving the sarcophagus intact or maintaining the purity of the machine spirit. They have tools and knowledge that predate the Imperium by millennia, technology from the height of the Eldar Empire when they were the galaxy's dominant power, and they're patient. For beings who have lived for 10,000 years, spending weeks or even months carefully dismantling the protective layers of a dreadnought is nothing. The process begins with study. The captured dreadnought is secured in a specialized chamber, held in place by stasis fields and gravitational clamps that prevent any possibility of movement, even if its systems somehow came back online. Homunculus coven members and their rack servants swarm over it, like insects over a corpse, scanning it with devices that can see through layers of armor, mapping its internal structure, identifying power conduits and control systems, and, most critically, locating the exact position of the sarcophagus within the chassis. For the Marine inside, this is a period of mounting dread. They're still conscious, still aware, though the haywire blast that disabled their dreadnought may have disrupted some of their higher cognitive functions. They can feel vibrations through the hull as tools are applied to their exterior. They might catch fragments of sound, alien voices discussing them in a language they can't understand, and they absolutely know what's happening. Every Space Marine is taught about the Xenos threats of the galaxy, and the Dark Eldar feature prominently in those lessons. They know where they are. They know what awaits them. Some Marines try to activate the self-destruct sequences that many dreadnought chassis possess, systems designed to prevent the enemy from capturing valuable Imperial technology. But the haywire pulse that disabled the dreadnought has usually taken these systems offline as well, and even if they're accessible, the Marine might hesitate. Not out of fear for themselves, Space Marines are conditioned to face death with courage, but out of fear of what knowledge might be lost. inside their head is centuries of tactical experience, information about their chapter's defenses and battle doctrines, and sometimes, in the case of very old dreadnoughts, historical knowledge that exists nowhere else. To destroy that, even to prevent it falling into enemy hands, requires a choice that few can make easily. And while they're hesitating, while they're trying to decide whether death is preferable to whatever comes next, the homunculi are working. They've identified the weakest points in the sarcophagus's armor, the places where access panels exist for maintenance, or where the seals between the sarcophagus and the chassis are thinnest. They begin cutting through these points with tools that don't rely on heat or physical force, but instead manipulate matter at the molecular level, weapons that were old when humanity first discovered fire. The breakthrough, when it comes, is both relief and terror for the imprisoned Marine. Relief because the waiting is over, because uncertainty is replaced by the horrible certainty of what's about to happen. Terror because that first breach in their containment, that first whisper of outside air that doesn't belong in their sealed environment, means they're no longer protected. The amniotic fluid that has sustained them begins to leak out, replaced by the air of Komorach itself, and that air carries with it scents that no space marine ever wants to smell: blood and fear and things that have no name. The homunculi work with methodical precision now, carefully expanding the breach, installing their own devices to stabilize the sarcophagus's life support systems before they remove too much of the original equipment. They don't want the Marine to die. Not yet. Not when there's so much more they can do with a living subject. Every connection is carefully noted and replicated. Every tube that carried nutrients or removed waste is replaced with their own equivalents. Every neural interface is mapped before it's disconnected. They're not opening the sarcophagus. They're learning how it works, reverse engineering imperial technology that will prove useful in future experiments. And then, finally, the moment arrives. The sarcophagus is opened. The Marine, reduced to little more than a torso and head floating in rapidly draining amniotic fluid, is exposed to open air for the first time in decades or centuries. The cold of the homunculus laboratory hits them like a physical blow. The lights, the horrible red lights of Komorach's illumination, burn through eyelids that may not have opened in longer than they can remember. And the sounds of the laboratory, screams from other chambers mixing with the hum of dark technology, and the wet, organic sounds of flesh being modified, all of it crashes over them at once. This is the moment of ultimate helplessness. The Marine is still alive, still conscious, still themselves in every way that matters. But they're utterly powerless. They have no limbs to fight with. They can't even move their head effectively, suspended as they are in the restraints of the sarcophagus. They're completely dependent on artificial life support for every breath, every heartbeat. They're exactly what they've been for however long they've been a dreadnought. But now that vulnerability is exposed, naked before beings whose entire existence revolves around exploiting such vulnerability. The homunculus leans in close, examining their new prize with eyes that have seen 10,000 years of suffering and remained unsated. They might speak, though the Marine probably doesn't understand the Eldar tongue. But understanding isn't necessary. The intent is clear in every gesture, every preparatory movement, every tool selected from the vast array available. The homunculus is an artist about to begin their masterpiece, and the canvas is screaming. The laboratories of a homunculus are designed to be functional spaces, purpose-built for the practice of their art. But they're also designed to break the mind as efficiently as they break the body. The chamber where a captured dreadnought would find themselves is engineered to assault every sense, to make the victim understand that they are in a place where the normal rules of reality no longer apply, where hope is not just absent, but actively punished. The architecture itself is aggressive. The ceiling might be uncomfortably low in some areas, forcing a sense of confinement, then suddenly vault upward into darkness, where things move that might be servants, or might be previous subjects, transformed beyond recognition. The walls are never quite vertical. always angled just slightly wrong to create a subliminal unease. And the surfaces are decorated with frescoes depicting scenes of torture so intricate, so detailed, that they must have been created by someone who had witnessed or performed every act depicted. The lighting is carefully controlled. The red illumination from Komorog's black suns is supplemented by other sources, bioluminescent growths that pulse with irregular rhythms, crystalline structures that glow with their own internal light, and occasionally cages of burning gas that cast dancing shadows across the room. No light source is quite steady. All of them flicker or pulse or shift in intensity, creating an environment where the eye can never quite focus, where shapes at the edge of vision might be real or might be illusions conjured by an exhausted mind. Sound is omnipresent. The laboratory echoes with screams, some near, some distant, all of them indicating that what's happening to the Marine is happening to others as well, has been happening for longer than they can imagine, will continue long after they're gone. But it's not just screams. There's music too. Strange melodies played on instruments that seem to produce notes that shouldn't exist. Songs that work their way into the mind and refuse to leave. And underneath it all, a subsonic rumble, barely perceptible, but constant. A vibration that some believe is the sound of Komorok itself. The city breathing, living, feeding on the suffering of all who dwell within it. The tools of the homunculus are arranged on racks that surround the central workspace where the Marine has been positioned. Some of these tools are recognizable, scalpels and saws and needles, though their proportions are wrong and their edges catch the light in ways that suggest they're sharper than any blade should be. Others are completely alien, devices whose function can only be guessed at from the screams they produce when applied to flesh. And some appear to be living things, semi-organic constructs that writhe with their own motion, eager to be employed. The homunculus begins with assessment. They need to understand the full extent of their canvas before they can begin to work. This means examining every remaining part of the Marine's body, testing nerve responses, measuring pain thresholds, documenting the baseline from which all future modifications and tortures will be measured. For a Space Marine, this process is uniquely horrible, because their enhanced physiology means they can't simply retreat into shock. Their bodies are designed to keep them conscious and aware through injuries that would kill a normal human. That same adaptation now works against them, keeping them alert and present for every moment of what's being done to them. The psychological component of the torture begins immediately. Homunculi are masters of the mind as well as the body. They understand that breaking a Space Marine requires more than just physical pain. You have to attack the foundations of their identity, the things that make them who they are, the beliefs and loyalties that have sustained them through centuries of war. A homunculus will often begin by simply talking to their subject, asking questions about their chapter, their battles, their beliefs in the Emperor, not because they care about the answers, but because they want the Marine to hear themselves speak, to recognize how weak their voice sounds, how small they are in this place. If the Marine tries to resist, if they respond with defiance or oaths of loyalty, the homunculus will demonstrate just how little such things matter here. A small application of pain, carefully calibrated and precisely delivered, not enough to cause real damage, but more than enough to make the point. You're in a place where your conditioning means nothing, where your loyalty changes nothing, where your willpower is just another resource to be exhausted and consumed. The actual torture takes many forms, limited only by the homunculus's creativity and their desire to make the experience last. Some methods are classical: the systematic flaying of skin, the careful breaking of bones, the introduction of foreign substances into the body to cause pain from within. Space Marines can survive injuries that would kill normal humans, which means a homunculus can inflict much more damage before approaching the threshold where the subject might die. They can remove organs that the Marine has backups for, can break bones knowing they'll heal, can inflict wounds that would be fatal to others, but are merely agonizing to an Astartes. Other methods are more esoteric. The homunculi have devices that can stimulate specific nerve clusters, creating pain that has no source, that the mind perceives as coming from body parts that no longer exist. They have drugs that heighten every sensation to unbearable levels, that stretch subjective time so that a minute of torture feels like hours, that prevent the mind from escaping through unconsciousness no matter how much the body begs for that release. They have techniques that work on the mind directly, extracting memories and forcing the Marine to relive them, editing those memories to make them horrific, creating doubt about what's real and what's been fabricated. The extraction of information is ongoing throughout all of this. The homunculus wants to know everything the Marine knows: tactical doctrines, defensive positions, the names and capabilities of their battle brothers, the location of their chapter's fortress monastery, the rituals and traditions that define their chapter's culture. Not because the Dark Elder plan to use this information for military purposes. They're raiders, not conquerors, and they don't care about the strategic disposition of Space Marine forces. They want the information because extracting it is another form of torture, another way to make the Marine betray everything they've sworn to protect. And here's the truly insidious part. Even if the Marine refuses to answer, the homunculus will eventually extract what they want. They have devices that can read thoughts, technology that can interpret the firing patterns of neurons and reconstruct memories from brain activity. The Marine's silence accomplishes nothing except to draw out their suffering, to make the process take longer, to ensure that when the information is finally taken, they've endured so much that the betrayal feels almost welcome, a surrender that brings temporary relief from the relentless assault. For a Space Marine, beings who have been conditioned since childhood to endure pain, whose psycho-indoctrination is designed to make them resistant to torture, this is a special kind of horror. Their training tells them that they can endure, that pain is temporary and faith is eternal, that no matter what's done to their body, their soul belongs to the Emperor. But the homunculi have been breaking strong-willed beings for 10,000 years. They know every technique the Imperium uses to condition its soldiers. They know how to work around it, through it, or simply outlast it. The duration of the torture varies. For some Marines, the initial breaking might take days or weeks as the homunculus systematically dismantles their resistance. For others, especially those who have already endured centuries as a dreadnought, who have spent so long in isolation that their grip on identity is already tenuous, the process might be faster. But regardless of how long it takes, the endpoint is always the same. The moment when the Marine stops being a warrior of the Emperor and becomes just another piece of raw material in the homunculus's laboratory. But death, that final mercy that every captured soldier hopes for, that doesn't come. Because the homunculi don't let their subjects die. They have techniques to sustain life indefinitely, to repair damage even as it's being inflicted, to bring subjects back from the very brink of death over and over again. For a Space Marine, whose enhanced physiology already makes them difficult to kill, this means their suffering can continue far longer than any normal humans would. The ultimate cruelty is this: a Space Marine's body is engineered to survive. That gift becomes a curse in the hands of the homunculi. What makes the fate of a captured dreadnought uniquely horrible, worse even than the torture inflicted on regular Space Marines, is the way the Marines' own enhanced physiology becomes their greatest enemy. The modifications that once made them superhuman warriors, that allowed them to stride across battlefields like demigods of war, now serve only to prolong their suffering and make death an impossible dream. Consider the Laraman cells, specialized organs implanted in every Space Marine that secrete a substance to quickly seal wounds. In battle, this means a Space Marine can suffer injuries that would cause a normal human to bleed out in minutes and continue fighting. In the torture chambers of a homunculus, It means that wounds inflicted don't stay open long enough to cause blood loss that might lead to unconsciousness or death. The Marine's own body works against them, healing them just enough to keep them aware and suffering. The Biscopea and osmold, organs that enhance muscle development and bone growth, mean that even the most severe physical damage heals relatively quickly. Bones that are broken will knit back together, sometimes incorrectly if the homunculus desires it, creating new angles of pain. Muscles that are torn or removed can regenerate, providing a renewable resource for a torturer who wants to experiment with the same subject repeatedly. The catalepsian node, which allows space marines to remain conscious even when parts of their brain are sleeping, becomes a nightmare when it prevents the marine from escaping their torment through true unconsciousness. Sleep, when it comes at all, is only partial, leaving part of the mind aware of what's happening even when they should be resting. There is no true respite, no moment of oblivion where the pain stops existing. Most cruelly, the Susan membrane, which can put a space marine into a state of suspended animation when grievously wounded, doesn't activate properly in the controlled environment of a homunculus laboratory. That organ requires specific triggers, usually massive trauma combined with certain environmental factors. A skilled homunculus knows how to inflict damage that's severe enough to be excruciating, but not severe enough to trigger the Susan response. The marine remains conscious, aware, present for every moment of their torment. The homunculi enhance these natural resiliences with their own techniques. They have regeneration vats where subjects can be submerged overnight, healing all damage but retaining the memories of how that damage was inflicted. They have drugs that accelerate healing while preventing the body from entering shock. They have neural stimulators that keep the brain active and aware, no matter how much the body is telling it to shut down. In the hands of a homunculus, a space marine's ability to survive becomes an endless loop of suffering, healing, and suffering again. But the physical torture, as terrible as it is, isn't the worst part. The homunculi understand that to truly break a space marine, you have to destroy what they are on a fundamental level: their identity as a warrior, their loyalty to their chapter and their emperor, their sense of purpose and meaning. All of these must be systematically dismantled until nothing remains but raw suffering, without context or hope. This psychological torture takes many forms. Sometimes it's as simple as forcing the marine to watch as other prisoners are tortured, making them complicit in suffering they can't prevent. The homunculus might bring in captured civilians, people the Marines chapter was supposed to protect, and torture them while explaining that this is happening because the Marine failed, because they allowed themselves to be captured, because their weakness has led directly to these innocents suffering. Other times, the approach is more insidious. The homunculus might offer the Marine choices, false choices that seem to provide some control, but actually just force them to participate in their own torment. Which limb should be removed first? Would you prefer pain that's intense but brief, or lesser pain that continues for hours? If you answer one question about your chapter, we'll stop for the day, but if you refuse, we'll continue indefinitely. Every choice is designed to make the Marine feel complicit, to erode the sense that they're simply a victim of circumstances beyond their control. The homunculi are also masters of manipulating time perception. They have drugs and techniques that can make minutes feel like hours, hours like days, days like years. A Marine might experience subjective decades of torture in what's actually only weeks of real time. When they're finally pulled out of that state, they find they can't tell what's real anymore. How long have they been here? Days? Centuries? Has anyone come looking for them, or have they been forgotten entirely? The uncertainty is itself a form of torture, one that breaks down the mental defenses that might otherwise allow them to endure. Memory manipulation is another tool in the homunculus arsenal. They can extract specific memories, force the Marine to relive them with modifications that make them traumatic. A memory of a victorious battle might be altered so that the Marine remembers their brothers dying due to their own failures in tactics. A memory of their original induction into the chapter might be edited to make them remember begging not to be chosen, pleading to be left alone, showing cowardice that they know they never displayed. These false memories are installed alongside the real ones, creating a confusion of identity. What did they really do? Who are they really? If they can't trust their own memories, what can they trust? Some homunculi take particular delight in breaking down the Marine's faith. They'll engage in philosophical debates, pointing out the logical inconsistencies in imperial theology, noting how the emperor's protection has utterly failed in this case. They'll describe in detail what will happen to the Marine's soul when they finally die, how Slanesh, or whatever warp entity is closest, will claim them because they died in a state of such suffering and despair. They'll suggest that the emperor never cared about them personally, that they were just a tool, and now that the tool is broken, they've been discarded and forgotten. And perhaps worst of all, they introduce the slow poison of hope repeatedly offered and then crushed. A homunculus might pause the torture for days or weeks, allowing the Marine to heal, giving them time to think maybe, just maybe, it's over. Then they resume with renewed vigor, or they might stage a fake rescue attempt, complete with sounds of battle and familiar voices calling for the Marine, only to reveal it was all an elaborate illusion designed to make the subsequent return to torture even more crushing. Every time hope rises, it's specifically so the homunculus can destroy it again, teaching the Marine that hope itself is just another form of suffering. The stretching of time, the manipulation of memory, the systematic destruction of identity, all of it serves a singular purpose: to make the Marine forget who they were. To reach a point where they can't remember being a warrior, can't recall the face of their chapter master, can't recite the oaths they've sworn thousands of times. When they reach that point, when the person they were has been erased and only suffering remains, only then does the homunculus consider the initial phase of their work complete. Because at that point, the real experimentation can begin. Once a Space Marine has been thoroughly broken, once their resistance has been overcome and their identity shattered, the homunculus faces a choice about what to do with their prize. A fully intact Space Marine body, even one as reduced as a dreadnought's occupant, represents raw material for a variety of projects. The fate of any individual Marine depends on the homunculus's current interests, their standing in their coven, and what favors or debts they owe to other Dark Eldar. One possibility is that the Marine becomes a permanent exhibition piece, a living trophy displayed in the homunculus's laboratory, or sold to a wealthy Archon's collection. In this scenario, the Marine is modified to ensure they survive indefinitely while remaining constantly aware of their situation. They might be partially flayed, their enhanced musculature and organs visible beneath transparent replacement skin, serving as both a demonstration of Astartes' physiology and a constant source of suffering. They might be suspended in a stasis field that prevents movement but doesn't prevent sensation, unable to do anything but experience their situation for years, or decades, or centuries at a stretch. These exhibition pieces are sometimes displayed in semi-public areas, places where other Dark Eldar can come to view them. Part of the appeal is educational, Dark Eldar warriors paying to learn about the physiology and weaknesses of the Imperium's finest soldiers. But mostly, it's entertainment, the chance to see a broken demigod, to mock something that was once so powerful. The Marine remains conscious through all of this, unable to respond, unable to die, just existing as a curiosity for beings who find their suffering amusing. Another common fate is conscription into the gladiatorial arenas. Komorragh has vast stadiums where combat for entertainment is a daily occurrence, and Space Marines, even broken and mutilated ones, are always popular attractions. The homunculus might sell the Marine to a witch cult, those gladiator warriors who rule the arenas, or they might lease them out for specific events. The Marine is given basic augmentations to ensure they survive the fights, but these augmentations are deliberately painful, a constant torment even between battles. In the arena, the Marine is forced to fight for the entertainment of crowds that number in the tens of thousands. Sometimes they fight other slaves, orcs, humans, tyrannid organisms captured and shipped in just for the occasion. Sometimes they fight Dark Eldar warriors who want the prestige of defeating an Astartes in single combat. And sometimes, in the cruelest matches, they're forced to fight other captured Space Marines, brothers turned against brothers for the amusement of a species that has no concept of loyalty or honor. The conditioning required to make a Space Marine fight in the arena is extensive. Even broken, even tortured beyond what any being should endure, a Space Marine's indoctrination runs deep. They won't fight for their captors willingly, so the homunculi employ a combination of drugs, neural implants, and psychological programming to override their will. Pain compliance systems that activate if they refuse to fight. Stimulants that flood their system with artificial aggression. In the worst cases, personality overrides that temporarily suppress their consciousness entirely, leaving their body fighting on pure instinct and training, while their mind screams in the darkness. Some Marines last years in the arenas. Their enhanced physiology and combat training make them survivors, even in these hopeless circumstances. But survival in the arenas isn't mercy. Every fight is designed to injure but not kill, to provide maximum entertainment value while keeping the fighters alive for future matches. The Marine accumulates damage that their body struggles to heal, developing a kind of physical and psychological scarring that goes beyond what even Space Marine resilience can handle. Eventually, even the strongest break completely, reduced to something that barely remembers it was once human, much less a warrior of the Imperium. Perhaps the most horrifying fate is transformation into a grotesque. These are the homunculi's most successful experiments in flesh sculpting, beings that have been so extensively modified that they bear almost no resemblance to their original form. The process of creating a grotesque is extensive and varies depending on the homunculus's preferences, but it generally involves massive increases in size and strength, the addition of weapons grafted directly onto the body, and modifications to the brain that increase aggression while reducing higher cognitive function. For a Space Marine, becoming a grotesque is the final death of who they were. The process strips away everything that made them an individual, leaving only a creature of muscle and rage. They're used as enforcers by the homunculi, living weapons that protect laboratories and drag away subjects who become uncooperative. Sometimes they're leased to cabals as shock troops, their enhanced strength and durability making them effective in the front lines of raids. The Marine's consciousness, what little remains of it, is trapped inside this twisted body, aware on some level of what they've become, but unable to do anything except follow the imperatives that have been programmed into them. The truly insidious part of the grotesque fate is that it's sometimes offered as a reward, a release from the torture. The homunculus will explain that if the Marine cooperates, provides information, betrays their chapter, they'll be transformed into a grotesque and all the suffering will end. The thing they'll become won't remember being human. It won't feel guilt or shame or psychological pain. It'll just be a simple creature of violence. And isn't that better than the endless torture? Some Marines, after enough time in the laboratories, actually accept this offer, choose to betray everything they once stood for in exchange for the promise of oblivion. Another possibility is that the Marines simply become source material for other experiments. Homunculi are constantly working on new projects, developing new toxins, creating new types of pain engines, improving their regeneration techniques, all of which require test subjects. A Space Marine's enhanced biology makes them ideal for this research. Their organs can be harvested and studied, revealing insights into Imperial augmentation technology. Their blood can be analyzed for clues about gene seed modification. Their brains can be dissected to understand how their psycho-conditioning works. In this scenario, the Marine is slowly disassembled, piece by piece, each part used for a different experiment. The homunculus ensures they remain alive and conscious as long as possible during this process, both to gather data on pain responses and simply because keeping them aware is more interesting. The Marine watches as their own body is taken apart and distributed to various projects, their organs ending up in different storage units, their genetic material being cultured in vats, their consciousness eventually reduced to just a brain in a jar, still thinking, still aware, but utterly divorced from any possibility of action or escape. Some homunculi specialize in creating what they call living tapestries, art pieces made from the bodies of victims arranged in elaborate displays. A space marine might be incorporated into one of these, their flesh stretched and positioned to create a specific aesthetic effect. The homunculus might combine multiple subjects, weaving them together so that where one body ends and another begins becomes impossible to determine. These tapestries are considered high art in certain circles of Cumorah, and successful pieces can bring the homunculus tremendous prestige and wealth. The psychological torture inherent in becoming a living tapestry is profound. The Marine is locked in position, unable to move, their body bent and shaped into forms that cause constant pain. They can see and hear, aware of others being added to the tapestry around them, aware of Dark Elder coming to view the artwork and discussing its aesthetic merits while completely ignoring the suffering of the beings that compose it. Time loses all meaning in this state. Days blend into years. The Marine's mind, desperate for stimulation, begins to fracture, creating elaborate internal worlds that are sometimes more terrifying than the reality they're trapped in. In rare cases, a homunculus might attempt to recreate the Space Marine's dreadnought, not to allow them to fight again, but to make a mockery of their former glory. They build a twisted parody of a dreadnought chassis, all spikes and blades and torture devices, and install the Marine's sarcophagus at its heart. But this new shell doesn't respond to the Marine's control. Instead, it's puppeteered by the homunculus or their servants, forcing the Marine to watch through their optical sensors as their body, or what passes for it, commits atrocities against other prisoners. The Marine is turned into a weapon against those they should protect, powerless to stop their own actions, their existence reduced to being a forced observer of horrors committed in their name. Regardless of which fate befalls the captured Marine, certain constants remain. They're kept alive far longer than they want to be. They're never allowed the mercy of death. Their suffering serves a purpose in the Dark Elder economy, feeding the homunculus's need for souls to sustain themselves, entertaining other Dark Elder who view suffering as art, and providing research data that advances the already terrifying capabilities of homunculi science. The Marine becomes a resource to be used, a toy to be played with, an experiment to be conducted, anything except what they once were: a warrior, a protector, a hero of the Imperium. And all the while, deep in whatever remains of their mind, they remember what it was like to be more than this. They remember having purpose, having dignity, having worth beyond the amusement value of their screams. That memory, that impossible distance between what they were and what they've become, is perhaps the cruelest torture of all. The question of whether any dreadnought has ever escaped from Cumorah after being captured is one that the Imperium has never been able to answer definitively. The official records maintained by most Space Marine chapters are deliberately vague on the subject, acknowledging that captures have occurred, but providing few details about outcomes. This ambiguity serves a purpose. It allows chapters to claim their fallen brothers have been recovered or granted the Emperor's peace when the reality might be far darker. What we do know is that rescue attempts have been made. The most famous example is the Salamander's assault on Cumorah itself, a raid of such audacity that it shocked even the Dark Elder who thought themselves safe in their hidden city. When a Salamander's strike cruiser was captured by the forces of Archon Zelian and dragged into the Dark City, along with its entire crew, the chapter refused to accept the loss. They tracked the psychic, beacon left by one of their librarians, and launched a full-scale counterattack, bringing not just the Salamanders, but also contingents from the Howling Griffins and Silver Skulls chapters. The raid was devastatingly successful in its immediate objectives. The Space Marines recovered their captured cruiser and many of their brothers, and in the process, they caused such damage to Komorok's noble houses that it triggered a complete reorganization of power in the Dark City. The old aristocracy was broken, and Asdrubal Vecht, then merely an ambitious Archon rather than the supreme overlord he would become, rose to fill the power vacuum. From the Imperium's perspective, it was a clear victory, proof that even the Dark City could be breached and that the Dark Eldar were not invulnerable. But even this legendary raid, which is still taught in Space Marine chapter keeps as an example of brotherhood and determination, was not a complete success. Many salamanders who had been captured were never found. Some had been killed in the initial fighting, their bodies irretrievable. Others had been moved to other parts of Komorra, scattered across the sprawling city-state to prevent exactly this kind of concentrated rescue effort. And some, including at least one dreadnought, according to classified chapter records, were found but could not be saved. They had been so thoroughly modified, so completely transformed into something else, that recovery was impossible. Mercy killings were performed in those cases, giving the captured Marines the death they should have received on the battlefield rather than leaving them to their fate in the Dark City. The Salamander's raid was exceptional in its success. Most rescue attempts don't even come close to achieving their objectives. The logistical challenges of launching an assault into Komorra are almost insurmountable. First, you need to find a way into the webway, a feat that requires either Eldar cooperation, which is rarely forthcoming, or the discovery of an active webway portal, which the Dark Eldar guard jealously. Then you need to navigate the webway itself, a dimension that shifts and changes, where paths that existed yesterday might be gone today. And if you somehow reach Komorrach, you find yourself in a city of impossible scale, where millions of Dark Eldar live, where every district is a death trap designed to defeat invaders, where the very architecture serves as a weapon against intruders. Even if a rescue force reaches the location where their captured brother is being held, they face the problem of extraction. The captured Marine has likely been there for weeks or months at minimum, possibly years, depending on how long it took the chapter to organize a rescue attempt. In that time, the homunculi have had ample opportunity to begin their work. The Marine might be barely recognizable as what they once were. They might be too badly injured to move. They might be so deeply conditioned that they attack their would-be rescuers. And even if they can be freed from whatever apparatus holds them, getting them out through hostile territory back to the webway portal, while under attack from every Dark Elder force in the vicinity, borders on the impossible. The mathematics of such rescue attempts are brutally clear. To have any chance of success, a chapter needs to commit significant forces, potentially including multiple companies of Space Marines, which represents a substantial portion of their available strength. The likelihood of success is low, the casualties will be high, and even if they succeed, what they recover might be too damaged to ever resume any kind of meaningful existence. Against these costs, some chapter masters make the cold calculation that the resources would be better spent elsewhere, fighting battles they can win rather than pursuing a rescue that will likely fail and weaken the chapter in the process. This is not a decision made lightly or without anguish. Space Marines value their brothers above almost all else, and the idea of abandoning one of their own to such a fate goes against everything they believe in. But they're also pragmatists, taught to weigh costs against benefits, to make the decisions that give the Imperium the best chance of survival. If rescuing one captured brother costs the lives of 50 others and weakens the chapter so much that entire worlds fall to the enemies of mankind, is that an acceptable trade? The debate over this question has caused rifts within chapters, with some brothers arguing for rescue attempts at any cost, while others advocate for a more measured approach. Some chapters handle this by setting strict time limits. If a rescue can be mounted within a specific time frame, usually measured in days or weeks, then the attempt is made. If too much time has passed, The captured brother is declared lost, his gene seed forfeited, his name added to the rolls of honored dead. This approach provides clear guidelines and prevents the chapter from expending resources on increasingly unlikely rescue attempts. But it also means accepting that some brothers will be abandoned to their fate, left in the hands of the Dark Elder with no hope of salvation. There are persistent rumors in Imperial military circles of Space Marines who have been in Dark Elder captivity for decades or even centuries and then somehow escaped or been recovered. These stories are never confirmed, and when investigated, they inevitably fall apart under scrutiny. But they persist because they offer hope, because accepting that capture by the Dark Elder is a fate worse than death, with no possibility of escape, is psychologically unbearable for many Imperial soldiers. Better to believe that somehow, somewhere, someone survived and returned. The reality is darker. In the thousands of years since the Dark Elder began their raids on real space, in the countless millions of captives they've taken back to Komorrah, the number who have escaped or been successfully rescued can probably be counted in the dozens at most. The Dark Elder are too careful, too skilled at their craft, too deeply entrenched in a city that has been their stronghold for 10 millennia. The slaves they take don't escape. They don't get rescued. They die in the arenas or the laboratories or the private collections of archons. And if they're lucky, that death comes relatively quickly, rather than being drawn out over years of torture. For a dreadnought specifically, the chances of rescue are even lower than for a regular captive. The technical expertise required to move a sarcophagus without killing the Marine inside, the sheer weight and bulk of the apparatus even after it's been extracted from its chassis, the way a dreadnought's presence would slow down any extraction team trying to move quickly through hostile territory. All of these factors make a successful rescue nearly impossible. A chapter mounting a rescue attempt would essentially be forced to choose: spend the time and resources trying to extract the dreadnought and likely fail the entire mission, or complete the objectives they came for and leave the dreadnought behind. The only real mercy available to a captured dreadnought is death, and even that the Homunculi work hard to deny them. If a rescue force does find one of their captured brothers, if they can see what's been done to them, the most compassionate action is often to end their suffering rather than attempt recovery. A melter charge placed against the sarcophagus, a quick prayer for the Emperor to receive his faithful servant, and the captured Marine is finally granted the peace they should have found on the battlefield. It's not the glorious death that Space Marines are taught to seek, but it's better than the alternative of continued existence in the depths of Komorrah. This grim calculus, the knowledge that capture by the Dark Elder is effectively a death sentence, affects how Space Marine chapters conduct operations in areas where the Drukhari are active. Standing orders often include self-destruct protocols if capture seems imminent. Battle Brothers are instructed to ensure that disabled dreadnoughts are either recovered immediately or destroyed to prevent them falling into enemy hands. The gene seed, that most precious resource, is given priority in retrieval over living Space Marines in some situations, operating on the logic that the gene seed can create new warriors, while a captured Marine is already lost. These protocols exist because the Imperium, for all its faults, understands something fundamental about the Dark Elder. They don't just kill their enemies. They consume them. They turn suffering into a resource, a currency, an art form. To be captured by them is to become fuel for a society built on agony, and death, terrible as it is, remains the better option. The capture of a Space Marine dreadnought by the Dark Elder carries implications that extend far beyond the fate of the individual Marine trapped inside. From a strategic, psychological, and cultural perspective, such an event represents one of the worst outcomes that the Imperium and Space Marine chapters can face, touching on issues of security, morale, and the very identity of the Astartes as the Emperor's finest warriors. From a purely military standpoint, the loss of a dreadnought is catastrophic for a chapter in several ways. First, there's the immediate tactical loss. dreadnoughts are irreplaceable assets, walking relics that contain not just powerful weapon systems, but also centuries or even millennia of combat experience and tactical knowledge. The techniques for creating new dreadnoughts have been largely lost since the Horus Heresy, meaning that each chassis is a precious artifact that cannot be replicated. When a chapter loses a dreadnought, they're not just losing a powerful unit, they're losing a piece of their history that can never be recovered. Second, and perhaps more seriously, is the intelligence compromise. A dreadnought, who has been active for centuries, possesses intimate knowledge of their chapter's operations, defensive positions, internal politics, and strategic capabilities. They know where the chapter's fortress monastery is located and how it's defended. They know the routes the chapter typically takes through space. They know the names and capabilities of current leaders and what personality flaws those leaders might possess. They know the chapter's gene seed storage locations, their recruiting worlds, their secret agreements with other imperial organizations. All of this information, everything the dreadnought knows, can be extracted by the homunculi. The Dark Eldar might not use it for immediate military purposes. They're raiders rather than conquerors, but they absolutely will trade such information to others who might find it valuable. Chaos warbands would pay dearly for intelligence on a Space Marine chapter's vulnerabilities. Orc warbosses might be convinced to attack specific targets. Even other Imperial organizations, rivals of the chapter in question, might be interested in secrets that could be leveraged for political advantage. The psychological impact on the chapter itself cannot be overstated. Space Marines are taught from their induction that they are the Emperor's chosen, that they will face death without fear, that their purpose is to serve, and if necessary, die in his name. The idea that one of their brothers, especially an ancient hero interred in a dreadnought, could be captured and tortured indefinitely by Xenos is an affront to everything they believe. It challenges the narrative of Space Marine invincibility and forces them to confront the reality that even they can be broken. When a chapter realizes one of their dreadnoughts has been captured, especially if they're unable to mount a successful rescue, it creates a crisis of faith within the Brotherhood. Some Marines become obsessed with vengeance, dedicating themselves to hunting Dark Eldar wherever they can be found. Others fall into despair, wondering if the same fate awaits them should they fall in battle. Still others become paranoid about security, insisting on additional safeguards and protocols to prevent future captures, changes that can strain relationships with other Imperial organizations and even create tensions within the chapter itself. The cultural impact extends beyond just the chapter that suffers the loss. When word spreads through Imperial military circles, which it inevitably does despite efforts at secrecy, it affects morale across multiple organizations. Imperial Guard regiments hear that even Space Marines can be taken by the Dark Eldar and subjected to fates worse than death. And suddenly, their own training about what to do if captured seems hopelessly inadequate. Naval crews become more fearful of webway attacks, knowing that conventional weapons and tactics offer little protection. Even civilians on worlds that have survived Dark Eldar raids become more traumatized, as the idea that the Emperor's angels can't protect themselves suggests they certainly can't protect anyone else. From the Dark Eldar perspective, the capture of a dreadnought is a tremendous victory, one that brings prestige to the cabal that accomplished it, and wealth to the homunculus who receives the prize. It becomes a story told in the arenas and pleasure houses of Komorra, an example of Dark Eldar superiority over the younger races. The fact that they can reach into the heart of Imperial military might pluck away one of humanity's greatest warriors and make them serve Dark Eldar purposes is a demonstration of power that resonates throughout their society. This propaganda value is exploited deliberately. Dark Eldar raiders sometimes release survivors from their attacks with specific memories intact, allowing those survivors to spread stories about the fates of captured Space Marines. These tales, distorted by trauma and the unreliability of memory, but nevertheless containing cores of truth, serve to terrify Imperial populations and make Dark Elder raids seem even more unstoppable than they already are. The psychological warfare is subtle but effective, as entire worlds might surrender or pay tribute rather than risk the attention of the Dark Eldar and the horrific fates that attention brings. For the wider Imperium, the capture of dreadnoughts by Dark Eldar is part of a broader pattern of vulnerability that Imperial authorities struggle to address. The Drukhari represent a threat that conventional military doctrine has trouble accounting for. They don't conquer territory, so you can't draw defensive lines against them. They don't have supply chains that can be disrupted or home bases in real space that can be attacked. They strike from nowhere, take what they want, and disappear before any response can be organized. And they're specifically motivated to capture the most valuable targets, the heroes and leaders whose loss hurts the Imperium most. Various solutions have been attempted over the millennia. Some chapters have developed protocols where dreadnoughts are never deployed alone, always accompanied by forces dedicated to their protection and recovery. Others have installed more aggressive self-destruct systems in their dreadnought chassis, systems that can be triggered remotely if capture seems imminent. A few chapters have even explored the idea of limiting what information is shared with their dreadnoughts, keeping them ignorant of certain strategic details so that if they are captured, the intelligence compromise is minimized. None of these solutions are entirely satisfactory. They all involve compromises, trading some capability or principle for improved security. And ultimately, they all rest on the acknowledgement of a terrible truth. The Imperium cannot fully protect its warriors from this particular threat. The Dark Eldar are too fast, too skilled, too deeply embedded in a dimension that Imperial forces cannot effectively access. They will continue to take prisoners. Some of those prisoners will be Space Marines, and some of those Space Marines will be dreadnoughts. The theological implications add another layer of complexity. The Imperial cult teaches that the Emperor protects his faithful, that those who serve him are rewarded either in life or in death. But what does it mean when a loyal servant, a warrior who has already given everything to the Imperium, is abandoned to endless torture in a Xenos city? How do you reconcile the teachings of the Ministorum with the reality of what happens in Comorragh? These are questions that ecclesiarchy theologians struggle with, usually falling back on the argument that such fates are tests of faith, trials that prove the strength of the captured Marine's devotion. This argument provides little comfort to the chapters affected or to the wider Imperial military. It sounds hollow when measured against the reality of what Dark Eldar torture entails. But it's the only explanation the Imperium can offer, because the alternative, admitting that sometimes faith isn't enough and the Emperor's protection has limits, would undermine the entire religious foundation of Imperial society. There's also a practical element that gets discussed quietly in chapter strategiums, but rarely spoken of openly. What should be done if a captured dreadnought, or any captured Space Marine, is eventually recovered after extended time in Dark Eldar custody? The Astartes that returns will not be the same warrior who was captured. They'll have been broken in ways that challenge even Space Marines' psychological resilience. They might be carrying trauma that affects their performance in battle. They almost certainly will have divulged information under torture, creating a security concern even among their own brothers. Some chapters have protocols for this situation. Extensive psycho-reconditioning, sometimes taking years, designed to rebuild the Marine's identity and loyalty. In extreme cases, mind wipes that erase the memories of captivity along with much else, essentially creating a new person in the body of the returned Marine. And in the darkest cases, quiet executions disguised as training accidents, operating on the logic that a compromised Space Marine represents too great a risk to the chapter's security. These measures are never discussed openly because they raise uncomfortable questions about the nature of Space Marine brotherhood and loyalty. If a chapter will kill one of their own because they've been tortured past some undefined breaking point, what does that say about the bonds between battle brothers? If the chapter's security is valued more highly than the life of an individual Marine, even one who has served for centuries, How can any Marine trust that they won't be similarly abandoned if the situation demands it? The answer, of course, is that Space Marines don't think about such things when they can avoid it. They're trained not to dwell on worst-case scenarios, but to focus on the mission at hand. But in the quiet moments, when they're maintaining their war gear or standing watch in the deep hours of a ship's cycle, some must wonder what they would do if captured. Would they have the strength to resist, or would they break like so many before them? Would their chapter come for them, or would they be declared dead and forgotten? And if they somehow survived and returned, would they be welcomed back or quietly disappeared to protect the chapter's secrets? These are the thoughts that the capture of a dreadnought by Dark Eldar forces every Space Marine to confront, whether they acknowledge them or not. It's a reminder that for all their enhancement, their training, their faith, they remain vulnerable, that there are fates worse than death, that the galaxy contains horrors that even the Emperor's finest warriors cannot overcome through strength of arms alone. And it's a reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, sometimes the only mercy is death, and even that mercy can be denied. In the vast darkness of the 41st millennium, where war is eternal and hope is measured in small victories against impossible odds, the capture of a Space Marine dreadnought by the Dark Eldar stands as one of the most terrible fates imaginable. It represents not just the loss of a warrior, but the corruption of everything that warrior once stood for, the transformation of a hero into a source of suffering for a society built on agony. We've explored the journey from battlefield to torture chamber, from proud servant of the Emperor to broken victim of the homunculus art. We've seen how the very enhancements that make a Space Marine superhuman become curses in the hands of torturers who have perfected their craft over 10,000 years. We've understood that death, that final enemy all warriors must eventually face, becomes instead an unattainable dream, a mercy continuously denied by beings who sustain themselves on suffering. The horror of this fate lies not in any single moment of pain, though those moments are beyond imagining, but in the totality of the experience. It's the knowledge that you will never escape, never be rescued, never die. It's watching your identity erode, your memories fade, your purpose dissolve until you can't remember who you were or why you once believed your existence mattered. It's existing as a plaything for creatures who view your agony as entertainment and your body as raw material, knowing that centuries might pass in this state, decades measured not in service to the Emperor, but in variations of torment. For those of us who engage with Warhammer 40k's lore, this scenario exemplifies why the setting is described as grim dark. It's not just that terrible things happen, wars are brutal, and death is common in countless fictional universes. It's that the terrible things are so thoroughly developed, so completely thought through, that they achieve a kind of horrifying plausibility. The Dark Eldar aren't just evil for the sake of being villains. They're evil because their survival depends on it, because they're a dying race that has found the most depraved possible way to stave off extinction. And that evil, when applied to someone like a Space Marine dreadnought who has already sacrificed everything for the Imperium, creates a tragedy that resonates precisely because we can understand how it happens and why it cannot be prevented. The broader message, if such a dark topic can be said to have a message, is about the cost of service in a universe that doesn't care about individuals. The Imperium sends its warriors to die in their billions, and occasionally something worse than death finds them instead. The chapters that lose dreadnoughts to the Dark Eldar must continue fighting, must train new warriors, must prosecute the Emperor's wars, even as they know that any of their brothers could suffer the same fate. That's the true grim darkness of the setting. Not that bad things happen, but that they happen in service of an Imperium that cannot or will not prevent them. And that even knowing all this, the Space Marines continue to serve because service is all they've ever known. There's something almost tragic about the Dark Eldar themselves in this context. They're condemned to prey on others because their own society's excesses doomed them to an eternity of feeding on suffering. They capture and torture not out of simple cruelty, though cruelty is absolutely involved, but out of existential necessity. In a strange way, the Space Marine dreadnought and the homunculus who tortures them are both prisoners of circumstances beyond their control, both caught in cycles of violence and suffering that predate their own existences and will continue long after they're gone. The question of what we as audience members take from stories like this is worth considering. Why do we engage with narratives this dark? Perhaps it's because, in their extremity, they help us appreciate the absence of such horrors in our own lives. Perhaps it's because they explore philosophical questions about identity, suffering, and the limits of endurance in ways that more conventional narratives cannot. Or perhaps it's simply that the Warhammer 40k universe, for all its darkness, is compelling precisely because it commits so completely to its premise, never flinching away from the logical consequences of the grimdark future it has created. Whatever the reason, the fate of a dreadnought in Dark Eldar captivity remains one of the most disturbing scenarios in Warhammer 40k lore. It takes the tragedy of the dreadnought's existence, already questionable when you consider the psychological cost of life as a brain in a jar, and makes it exponentially worse. It reminds us that in this setting, there is no safety, no sanctuary, no achievement grand enough to guarantee peace. Even the mightiest warriors can fall, and when they fall to certain enemies, their suffering has only just begun. For the Space Marine chapters of the Imperium, this knowledge shapes doctrine and drives desperation. It explains why chapters will sometimes risk everything on what seem like foolish rescue attempts, why they'll expend irreplaceable resources to recover or at least destroy their fallen brothers. It's not just about preventing intelligence leaks or denying the enemy a prize. It's about ensuring that those who serve don't end up in a fate that makes all their service meaningless, that transforms their sacrifice from noble to simply horrific. And for us, the observers of this fictional universe, it serves as one of the clearest examples of what makes Warhammer 40k unique among science fiction settings. It's a universe that looks at the question, what's the worst that could happen, and answers with scenarios like this, then develops those scenarios with enough detail and internal consistency that they achieve a kind of terrible credibility. The Dark Eldar. Capturing a dreadnought isn't just a plot point. It's a fully realized nightmare, complete with logistical details, psychological implications, and consequences that ripple through multiple levels of the setting's lore. If you found this exploration of one of 40k's darkest scenarios interesting, disturbing, or thought-provoking, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We cover a wide range of topics in Warhammer 40k lore, from the inspiring to the terrifying, always aiming to provide comprehensive, well-researched content that does justice to the depth and complexity of this remarkable setting. There are countless other stories in the Warhammer 40k universe, other fates that await those who walk the battlefields of the far future, other species with their own unique horrors to inflict. The galaxy is vast, the darkness is deep, and there's always more to explore. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and sometimes there are fates worse than death. In the silent darkness of a forgotten tomb complex, two forms of immortality meet. One is ancient beyond human comprehension, a consciousness transferred into living metal 60 million years ago, awake after an eternity of dreamless sleep. The other is a more recent tragedy, a warrior hero sealed into a walking sarcophagus, counting the centuries in moments of violence, separated by voids of unconsciousness. When Necron's scout units encounter a hibernating Imperial dreadnought, they stand face to face with something that mirrors their own cursed existence in ways that would be almost poetic, if the Necrons retained the capacity for such reflection. This is not simply a story about two war machines meeting in the dark. This is a confrontation between two philosophies of preservation, two methods of cheating death, two species that have chosen eternal service over the final piece of mortality. The Necrons, who shed their organic forms in a desperate bargain with star gods, now encounter humanity's own answer to preserving their greatest heroes past the point of death. Both races have created methods to extend the service of their warriors indefinitely, and both have discovered that immortality comes with costs that cannot be calculated in advance. The encounter begins quietly, as most profound moments do in the endless wars of the 41st millennium. Beneath the surface of a contested world, where human colonists have unknowingly built their settlements atop a slumbering Necron tomb complex, the awakening of the ancient race proceeds according to protocols established millions of years before humanity's ancestors first looked up at the stars. Tomb spiders click and whir as they restore stasis chambers to function. Scarab swarms flow through corridors, repairing damage accumulated over eons of hibernation. And Necron warriors begin their slow transition from dormancy to wakefulness, their consciousness flickering back into awareness like lights igniting in a vast, darkened hall. The Imperial presence on this world is substantial, but not overwhelming. A Space Marine strike force had been dispatched here months ago, responding to reports of strange technological artifacts emerging from beneath the planet's crust. The Marines conducted their operations with characteristic efficiency, establishing forward bases and launching reconnaissance missions deep into the underground structures. But when the true scale of what lay beneath became apparent, when the first Necron warriors phased into reality with their Gauss weapons already tracking targets, the situation transformed from archaeological investigation to desperate combat. Among the Imperial forces was a venerable dreadnought, a warrior who had served his chapter for over 7 centuries, witnessing conflicts that had passed into legend for most of his battle brothers. He had fought in the depths of these alien structures, his assault cannon roaring defiance at the rising tide of living metal warriors, his power fist crushing enemy constructs with the fury of the Emperor's wrath. But the battle had not gone as planned. Overwhelming numbers, combined with the reality-bending technologies of the awakening tomb complex, had forced the Imperials into a fighting retreat. In the chaos of withdrawal, the ancient warrior had fallen, not destroyed, but damaged. His systems forced into emergency hibernation as his battle brothers struggled to evacuate what forces they could. Now he lies in the darkness, his sarcophagus sealed and his consciousness suspended in the dreamless void that is the mercy granted to those interred within dreadnought chassis. His massive form rests against the wall of an ancient chamber, surrounded by Xenos architecture that predates human civilization by millions of years. The markers that would identify his chapter are obscured by combat damage and the accumulated dust of the underground. His weapons are powered down, his sensors dark, his life support systems operating at minimal levels to preserve what remains of the organic component at his core. To any casual observer, he appears as nothing more than another piece of wreckage in a contested war zone. But to the Necrons, now slowly filling these chambers with their inexorable advance, he is something far more interesting. The first to encounter the dormant dreadnought are a pair of immortals, elite warriors, whose bodies are crafted from more sophisticated materials than the basic Necron warriors. They move through the chamber with purposeful efficiency, their Gauss blasters held ready, their sensors constantly scanning for threats. The chamber itself is ancient, its walls bearing the geometric patterns that the Necron tier favored in their architecture millions of years ago, designs that hurt human eyes to look at too long because they incorporate mathematical principles that organic brains are not optimized to process. The Immortals navigate this space with perfect precision, their targeting systems identifying potential threats and dismissing them in fractions of a second, their behavioral protocols driving them forward with the inexorable purpose that characterizes all Necron military operations. When their targeting systems identify the massive form in the corner, they pause. The readings are strange, contradictory, defying easy categorization. Metal, yes, but not the crude iron and steel of most human constructions. The sensor returns identify ceramite, adamantium, plasteel, alloys that represent the pinnacle of imperial metallurgical science, materials that require sophisticated manufacturing processes and quality control far beyond what most human forge worlds can reliably achieve. These are not the casual metals of civilian construction, or even standard military equipment. This is armor designed to withstand punishment that would vaporize lesser materials. Protection intended to keep its wearer functional in conditions that would destroy ordinary vehicles. And beneath those armored shells, something else. Something that registers as organic, yet not quite alive in any conventional sense. The Immortal's sensors detect heat signatures consistent with functioning biological systems, electromagnetic patterns that suggest neural activity, chemical signatures that indicate the presence of organic compounds. But the configuration is all wrong for a living being. The organic components are too small, too fragmented, too intimately integrated with mechanical systems to represent a conventional life form. It is as if someone has taken a living creature and reduced it to its absolute minimum functional components, then wired those components directly into a machine designed to house them. One of the Immortals approaches, its footsteps clicking against the ancient stone floor with a rhythm that has remained precisely consistent for the 60 million years since biotransference first transformed it from organic being into mechanical construct. The Immortal is programmed to be cautious around unknown technologies, to gather data before engaging, to prioritize intelligence collection over immediate destruction unless directly threatened. These behavioral protocols, encoded into its necrodermis, along with the basic patterns that define its identity, guide its movements as it circles the dormant construct, sensors working constantly to build a complete picture of what it has discovered. Up close, the dreadnought is massive, even by the standards of the Necron's own war constructs. It stands perhaps 4 meters tall, even in its dormant, slightly hunched posture, its bulk speaking to the power contained within that armored frame. The proportions are oddly anthropomorphic, suggesting that humans designed their war machines to echo the shape of their own bodies, despite the inefficiencies that such design choices introduce. A Necron construct of similar mass would be configured differently, optimized for function rather than form, shaped according to mathematical principles rather than aesthetic preferences. But humans, the Immortal's tactical database reminds it, are a young species, still attached to the symbolism and imagery that older races have long since abandoned as inefficient. The Immortal's sensors play across the machine's surface, cataloging damage patterns, analyzing alloy compositions, attempting to understand the purpose of this strange hybrid of organic and mechanical components. Impact craters from Gauss weapons mark the ceramite, the distinctive pattern of molecular disassembly, clearly visible where the flare beam struck armor that was strong enough to resist complete destruction. Burns from Tesla arcs trace across one shoulder, the electrical discharge having briefly superheated the metal before the construct's thermal management systems could compensate. A scoring mark from a particle whip cuts across the torso, deep enough to have compromised the outer armor layer, but not deep enough to reach the vital systems beneath. These damage patterns tell a story that the Immortal's tactical analysis subroutines begin to reconstruct. The construct engaged multiple Necron units simultaneously, was subjected to concentrated fire from weapons positioned at different angles, fought with the desperation of a warrior who knew retreat was not an option, but continued fighting anyway. The pattern of impacts suggests that the construct was attempting to cover the withdrawal of other forces, was deliberately drawing fire to itself to allow lesser units to escape. This behavioral pattern is consistent with human concepts of sacrifice and duty, concepts that the Immortal's database flags as important for understanding how these young beings think and fight. The data it gathers is transmitted instantly across the Tomb Complex's newly reactivated communications network, adding to the growing database of information about the younger race that has dared to intrude upon this world. Other Necron units receive the data stream and begin their own analysis, comparing what the immortal has discovered against their stored knowledge of human capabilities and technologies. Tactical assessment algorithms calculate the threat level represented by such constructs. Strategic planning systems consider the implications of humans deploying such assets. Intelligence analysis functions attempt to determine how many similar constructs the humans might possess and where they might be located. The second immortal maintains its position near the chamber entrance, sensors focused outward, weapon ready to engage any threats that might approach. But part of its processing capacity remains allocated to analyzing the data being gathered by its companion, contributing its own observations and conclusions to the shared tactical picture. The two immortals function as a unit, their consciousness not truly merged, but coordinated through constant data exchange. Their individual perspectives combining to create a more complete understanding than either could achieve alone. This is how Necron military forces have always operated, through coordination so perfect that it appears telepathic to outside observers, through information sharing so complete that individual units function more like cells in a larger organism than as separate warriors. The sensor readings continue to accumulate, building a detailed picture of what the immortals have discovered. The power source at the construct's core is identified as a compact fusion reactor, primitive by Necron standards, but functional enough to sustain operations for extended periods. The weapon systems are catalogued, an assault cannon and a power fist, both designed for devastating close-range combat, where the construct's heavy armor and massive strength would provide maximum advantage. The life support equipment, that strange collection of tubes and pumps and filters that maintains the organic components, is analyzed and its function understood even if the immortals cannot comprehend why any species would choose such an inefficient method of preserving their warriors. The readings that confuse the immortals most are those coming from the organic component itself. Their sensors can detect brain activity, neural patterns that indicate some form of consciousness, but the patterns are strange, reduced, not quite matching what their database suggests human brain activity should look like during normal function. It is as if the consciousness that inhabits this construct is only partially present, as if whatever intelligence guides the machine exists in a state between full awareness and complete shutdown. The immortals lack the sophistication to understand what they are detecting, lack the context to recognize stasis when they see it. But they record the anomaly faithfully, add it to the data stream, trust that more specialized units will be able to interpret what they have found. In the deeper chambers of the tomb complex, where the true masters of this dynasty are completing their awakening, this data stream attracts attention. A cryptech, one of the technological masters whose knowledge spans millions of years, directs its consciousness toward this anomaly. The cryptech has spent eons studying the physical laws of the universe, manipulating matter and energy in ways that would appear as sorcery to lesser minds, bending reality itself to serve purposes that most beings cannot even conceive. It has witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, has observed the birth of stars and the death of galaxies, has accumulated knowledge that would take organic minds lifetimes merely to catalog, let alone to understand. Yet here is something that defies easy categorization, a construct that seems to blend the organic and the mechanical in ways that the cryptech's vast database does not fully explain. The readings are fascinating in their complexity, perplexing in their implications, worthy of deeper investigation in ways that few discoveries manage to be, for a being who has seen essentially everything the material universe has to offer. The combination of advanced metalworking and primitive biotechnology, the marriage of sophisticated armor systems with crude life support equipment, the apparent decision to preserve organic consciousness through mechanical means rather than pursuing true consciousness transfer, all of these choices speak to a philosophy and capability set that the cryptech finds genuinely interesting. The cryptech's interest is not merely academic, though the scientific curiosity that drove its mortal ancestors still flickers somewhere in its mechanical consciousness, a ghost of what it once felt when confronted with unknown phenomena. There are strategic considerations as well. Practical reasons why understanding this construct could prove valuable to the dynasty's larger goals. Understanding the capabilities and limitations of this technology could provide valuable intelligence about the foe they now face, could inform tactical decisions about how to engage such constructs in future battles, could reveal weaknesses that might be exploited to achieve victory with minimal expenditure of resources. The Necrons may possess overwhelming technological superiority, but they did not survive for 60 million years by being careless or dismissive of potential threats. The presence of such advanced technology, left behind in what appears to be a defensive position, suggests that the humans who built it considered it valuable, and anything valuable to an enemy is worth investigating. A command ripples through the tomb complex's communication network. The Immortals are to remain at their positions, maintaining a perimeter around the strange construct. More specialized units are being dispatched. Canoptek spiders, maintenance constructs, whose understanding of technology rivals even that of the cryptechs themselves, are directed toward the chamber, and the cryptech itself begins to make its way through the awakening tomb, drawn by the puzzle that this discovery represents. The Canoptek spiders arrive first, their spider-like forms skittering across the walls and ceiling with unnatural grace. They are not sentient in the way that the Necron lords and warriors are, but their programming is sophisticated beyond anything the Imperium has ever created. They begin their own analysis of the dreadnought, their multiple limbs extending delicate sensor probes that can detect and manipulate matter at the molecular level. One of them approaches the sarcophagus at the dreadnought's core, that armored tomb within a tomb that houses what remains of the Space Marine pilot. Its sensors detect the presence of organic matter sustained in some kind of artificial fluid, kept alive by systems that are crude by Necron standards, yet undeniably functional. The spider's analysis reveals something that would be surprising to anyone familiar with both races' technologies. The life support systems maintaining the dreadnought's pilot are failing. Not catastrophically, not yet, but the damage sustained in the recent battle has compromised several redundant systems. Power reserves are depleting more rapidly than they should. The amniotic fluid that sustains the pilot's organic remains is slowly degrading, its chemical balance shifting in ways that will eventually prove fatal. Given time, measured in months or perhaps a year at most, the systems will fail completely, and the warrior entombed within will finally find the peace of death that was denied to him when he was first interred in this walking tomb. This information presents an interesting dilemma, one that a more emotional species might find ironic. The Necrons, who long ago shed their organic forms in pursuit of immortality, have discovered a member of a younger race who clings to organic life through technological means that are simultaneously impressive and pathetically inadequate. The human within this machine is dying, slowly, locked in a sleep from which he cannot wake himself, dependent on systems that are themselves failing. It is a situation that parallels, in its own crude way, the awakening of the Necrons themselves. They too sleep in tombs, sustained by technologies designed to preserve them through eternity. They too wake only when called to war. They too exist in a state that is neither truly alive nor fully dead. When the cryptech arrives, gliding into the chamber on its canoptek cloak, the analysis of the dreadnought has been ongoing for nearly an hour by imperial time measurement. The cryptech dismisses the Immortals with a gesture, sending them to secure other sections of the tomb complex. The canoptek spiders remain, their continuing scans feeding data directly into the cryptech's consciousness. The cryptech itself approaches the dormant war machine, its sensory apparatus far more sophisticated than anything the lesser constructs possess, capable of perceiving reality in ways that organic minds cannot fully comprehend. What the cryptech sees is a marvel of primitive engineering, a solution to the problem of preserving a warrior past the point of physical death that is both ingenious and horrifying in its limitations. The human who built this never possessed the kind of understanding that would allow them to truly transfer consciousness into an artificial substrate. They lacked the Cetans' knowledge of the fundamental nature of the soul, lacked the Necron's own hard-won understanding of how to encode sentience into necrodermis. Instead, they simply kept the organic components alive, wiring them into a mechanical shell through neural interfaces that are crude but functional. The Cryptek can see the entire system laid out before its enhanced perception. The sarcophagus, its walls lined with life support equipment that maintains temperature, atmospheric composition, and the circulation of the amniotic fluid. The neural connectors that interface the pilot's remaining nervous system with the dreadnought's sensors and weapons. The power systems that feed energy to both the life support and the combat capabilities of the machine. It is all visible, transparent to the Cryptek's senses in ways that even the most skilled tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus could never achieve. And at the core of it all, suspended in fluid that cushions and sustains, is what remains of the pilot. Not much, by organic standards. The torso has been reduced to essential organs. Lungs, breathing the fluid that keeps them viable, a heart beating with the slow rhythm of deep hibernation. The brain, preserved and protected, its neurons firing in the minimal patterns of consciousness in stasis. Massive trauma is evident in the scarring and the crude mechanical replacements for organs that could not be saved. This warrior did not enter his metal tomb gently. He was destroyed in battle, his body so catastrophically damaged that only the most desperate measures could preserve any fragment of life. The Cryptek processes this information with the cold, analytical precision that is all that remains of what was once scientific curiosity. There is no empathy here, no emotional response to the tragedy of a warrior sealed forever in a tomb of his own body's remains. The Necrons lost such capacity for emotion when they underwent biotransference, trading the warmth of organic existence for the cold immortality of living metal. But there is interest, a kind of intellectual engagement with a problem that presents unexpected complexities. The technology itself is primitive, barely worthy of notice by the standards of a species that achieved mastery over dimensional engineering millions of years ago. The Cryptek could design superior systems in moments, could craft a consciousness transfer matrix that would allow the trapped warrior to exist in a body of necrodermis that would be superior in every measurable way to both his original flesh and his current mechanical prison. But the crude nature of the technology is not what holds the Cryptek's attention. Rather, it is the philosophical question that this discovery presents. The humans have created, in their own limited way, a mirror of what the Necrons themselves became. Here is a warrior who will never die, who sleeps in a tomb until called to battle, who exists in a state between life and death that can be sustained indefinitely. The parallels are undeniable, even to a mind that has long since lost the capacity for metaphorical thinking. The difference, of course, is one of scale and sophistication. The Necrons achieved total consciousness transfer, preserving their minds in substrates that would endure for millions of years. This human is merely being kept alive, his organic brain still vulnerable to age and damage, his existence dependent on technology that is already failing. Yet there is something here that merits consideration. The humans did this to preserve their greatest warriors, to allow heroes to continue serving their empire past the point of physical death. The motivation is identical to what drove the ancient Necrontyr to accept the Satan's offer of biotransference. Both species sought to preserve their warriors indefinitely, to create soldiers who could fight forever, accumulating experience and wisdom that would be lost if they were allowed to simply die. Both species chose eternal service over the finality of death. Both discovered that immortality comes with costs that cannot be fully anticipated. The Cryptek extends one of its manipulator appendages toward the dreadnought's sarcophagus, delicate sensor probes sliding across the armored surface. The technology here is interesting in its desperation. its clever solutions to problems that the humans clearly do not fully understand. The neural interface, for instance, is a crude approximation of proper mind impulse unit technology, yet it functions surprisingly well given the limitations of its design. The life support. Systems are inefficient, requiring constant maintenance and consuming resources at a rate that no Necron construct would tolerate, yet they have kept this warrior alive for centuries. The cryptech's analysis continues, drilling deeper into the fundamental nature of what it has discovered. The power source is a compact fusion reactor, generating energy through processes that the humans barely understand, maintaining it through ritual and prayer as much as actual comprehension of the underlying physics. The weapons systems are powerful, if crude, capable of delivering devastating firepower that would be effective even against Necron constructs if the dreadnought were awakened and allowed to engage. The armor is layered ceramite and adamantium, materials that represent the best the Imperium can manufacture, providing protection that is genuinely impressive by the standards of younger races. But it is the organic component, the pilot, that remains the focus of the cryptech's attention. The being that exists at the core of this machine is suffering, though it is too deeply in stasis to be aware of it. The neural interfaces cause constant low-level pain, a consequence of connecting organic nerve tissue directly to mechanical systems. The amniotic fluid, while sustaining life, is not a comfortable medium for organs designed to breathe air and pump blood through vessels. The psychological strain of being sealed in darkness, of existing only in brief windows of consciousness separated by centuries of nothingness, is something that would drive most organic beings to madness. The cryptech recognizes this suffering because the Necrons themselves experienced something similar in the early centuries after biotransference. When their consciousness first awakened in bodies of necrodermis, many found the transition unbearable. They raged against the loss of sensation, the absence of taste and touch, and the thousand subtle feelings that organic existence provided. Some went mad, their personalities fragmenting under the strain of existing in a substrate so fundamentally different from what they had evolved to inhabit. Others simply ceased, their consciousness dissipating like smoke, unable to maintain cohesion without the biological framework that had once housed it. The humans have attempted to avoid this problem by keeping their warriors' organic components alive, by maintaining the biological substrate that houses their consciousness. It is a different solution to the same problem, one that preserves the connection to organic existence at the cost of trapping the consciousness in a body that is irreversibly damaged. The cryptech cannot decide if this approach is more or less cruel than what the Necrons experienced. Both represent a kind of torture, an existence that is neither fully alive nor acceptably dead, a state of being that serves only the needs of eternal war. Additional Necron units begin to arrive in the chamber as word of the discovery spreads through the tomb complex's awakening hierarchy. A lord, its body adorned with the marks of rank and dynasty, emerges from a side passage to observe the strange artifact. The lord's interest is more strategic than scientific. It wants to know if this construct represents a threat that must be eliminated, or an opportunity that can be exploited. The cryptech provides its analysis, describing the capabilities and limitations of the dormant war machine, explaining the strange hybrid nature of the technology that sustains it. The Lord considers this information with the cold calculation that passes for thought among the Necron nobility. The presence of such a construct suggests that the human forces that recently withdrew from this area considered it valuable enough to deploy, yet not valuable enough to recover when withdrawal became necessary. This implies either that they possess many such constructs, making each individual unit expendable, or that the tactical situation became so desperate that they were forced to abandon assets they would have preferred to retrieve. Either possibility has implications for the strategic assessment of the human forces on this world. There is also the question of what to do with the construct now that it has been discovered. Several options present themselves, each with its own merits and drawbacks. The simplest solution would be to destroy it, to eliminate a potential threat before it can be reactivated. The Necrons possess weapons that could reduce the dreadnought to its component atoms in moments. Gauss flayers that would strip away armor and flesh with equal efficiency. Particle whips that could shred the sarcophagus and everything it contains. Destruction would be clean, efficient, and tactically sound. It would eliminate any possibility of the construct being used against them, would prevent the humans from recovering a valuable asset, and would send a clear message about the fate of those who dare to intrude upon a Necron tomb world. But destruction has disadvantages as well. It would eliminate the opportunity to study the technology in greater depth, to fully understand the capabilities and limitations of the humans' approach to preserving their warriors. It would waste what could potentially be valuable intelligence about human military doctrine, tactical thinking, and technological capabilities. The Cryptechs value knowledge above almost everything else, their scientific curiosity one of the few remnants of personality that survived biotransference. Destroying this construct before it has been fully analyzed would be wasteful in ways that offend the Cryptechs' fundamental nature. There is also a more subtle consideration, one that the Lord weighs carefully in its mechanical approximation of thought. The humans trapped on this world are already aware that they face Necron opposition. The loss of this construct will not change that fundamental reality, but the manner of the construct's loss could provide intelligence about Necron capabilities that the humans do not yet possess. If the dreadnought is simply destroyed, the humans will learn only that the Necrons possess weapons capable of eliminating their heavy war machines. If the dreadnought simply disappears, never to be found, the humans will be left with questions that they cannot answer, will waste time and resources searching for an asset that no longer exists where they expect to find it. The Cryptech makes a suggestion, its voice synthesized through systems that were designed to approximate the sounds of organic speech. The dormant construct could be transported deeper into the tomb complex, moved to one of the analytical chambers where it could be studied in greater detail. The process would not harm the warrior within, would not even disturb his slumber. The life support systems could be stabilized, the failing components repaired or replaced with Necron equivalents that would function with far greater efficiency. The construct could be preserved indefinitely, maintained in perfect stasis, while Cryptechs examined every aspect of its design and function. The Lord considers this proposal. There is appeal in the idea of preserving the construct for study, of adding it to the growing collection of artifacts and specimens that the Awakening dynasty is accumulating as it encounters the various younger races now infesting what was once Necron space. Collections of such specimens serve multiple purposes. They provide research subjects for the Cryptechs, allowing detailed study of technologies and biological systems that might prove useful or at least interesting. They serve as trophies, evidence of the dynasty's dominance over the lesser races, and in some cases, particularly unique specimens become valuable trade goods, items that can be exchanged with other dynasties for resources or information. But there is also risk in preservation. The construct contains organic components, and organic matter is notoriously unstable, prone to decay and degradation despite the best efforts to preserve it. The life support systems are already failing, and while Necron technology could certainly repair them, there is always the question of whether such repairs would be worth the resources expended. The Necrons do not lack for resources in any absolute sense, but every action requires calculation of cost versus benefit, and the value of preserving this particular specimen is not immediately clear. There is a third option, one that neither the Lord nor the Cryptech has yet voiced, but that both are considering in their separate analytical processes. The construct could be awakened, roused from its hibernation to face its captors. This option carries obvious risks. The dreadnought is designed for war, equipped with weapons that could inflict genuine damage on Necron forces before being overwhelmed. Its pilot, when conscious, would represent a genuine threat, a warrior with centuries of combat experience and the kind of desperate courage that makes organic beings dangerous even when facing superior forces. Awakening the construct would transform it from an inert object of study into an active combatant. Yet, there is appeal in this option as well, particularly for the more militant members of the Awakening dynasty. The Necrons may have lost much in biotransference, but the warrior ethos of their ancestors remains encoded in their behavioral protocols. There is something approaching respect for the construct and the warrior it contains. Recognition of a being who chose continued service over the peace of death, who exists in a state of eternal readiness to protect his people. The Necron warriors might be mindless automatons, their personalities erased by biotransference until only the most basic patterns of behavior remain, but the lords and the cryptex still retain echoes of what they once were, and what they once were, before even the transformation into mechanical bodies, was a warrior culture that valued strength and courage above almost all other virtues. The decision, when it comes, reflects both pragmatism and a kind of cold curiosity that is all that remains of what the Necrons once called scientific interest. The construct will be preserved, transported to deeper chambers where it can be studied in detail, but it will not be immediately awakened, not yet. The cryptech wants time to analyze the technology, to understand every aspect of how the humans have attempted to preserve their warrior past the point of death. There may come a time when awakening the construct serves some purpose, when the intelligence that could be gathered from the pilot justifies the risk of rousing him to consciousness. But that time is not now. The Canoptech spiders receive their instructions and begin the process of preparing the dreadnought for transport. Their manipulator appendages, capable of lifting objects many times their own mass through the application of gravitic technologies that humanity has yet to fully understand, grasp the dormant war machine gently. The spiders are programmed to avoid causing damage when it is not necessary, to preserve specimens in their original condition whenever possible. They lift the massive construct as if it weighs nothing, carefully maneuvering it through the chamber's entrance and into the corridors beyond. As the dreadnought is carried deeper into the tomb complex, past awakening warriors and reactivating weapons systems, past chambers that have not seen activity in 60 million years, the full reality of its situation would be apparent to any observer capable of understanding it. The Space Marine sealed within that sarcophagus went into stasis expecting to wake to the sounds of battle, to be roused by his chapter's tech marines when his service was once again required. Instead, he will wake, if he wakes at all, to find himself in the possession of an alien species that predates humanity by millions of years, studied by minds that would appear as gods to lesser beings, a specimen in a collection of curiosities gathered by a race that has forgotten how to feel curiosity in any meaningful sense. The journey through the tomb complex reveals the scale of what lies beneath this world's surface. The chambers extend for kilometers in every direction, vast halls that could hold armies, repositories of technology that represents the pinnacle of achievement from a civilization that ruled the galaxy when Earth was still cooling from its formation. Necron warriors stand in perfect ranks, recently awakened and awaiting orders that will send them forth to reclaim what their ancestors once possessed. Immortals patrol key junctions, their enhanced forms and superior weapons, marking them as the elite of the dynasty's forces. Lichguards stand motionless at the entrances to the innermost chambers, sworn protectors of the nobility, warriors whose loyalty survived even the horror of biotransference. The analytical chamber to which the dreadnought is brought is a space designed for the examination of artifacts and specimens deemed worthy of detailed study. The room is circular, its walls lined with systems that can analyze matter at every scale from the quantum to the macro, that can subject samples to conditions ranging from absolute zero to the heart of a star, that can manipulate time itself within contained fields to observe how materials and systems respond to the passage of millennia compressed into moments. At the center of the chamber is a raised platform where the object of study is placed, surrounded by the analytical apparatus that will tease out every secret it contains. The Canoptek spiders place the dreadnought carefully on this platform, adjusting its position until it rests, perfectly centered, its damaged form illuminated by the chamber's luminescence. The spiders retreat to the edges of the room, their task completed, ready to respond if further manipulation is required. The Cryptek enters behind them, gliding to a position where its sensors can observe the analysis as it proceeds. Additional Crypteks arrive, drawn by word of this unusual specimen, each bringing their own specialized knowledge to the examination. The analysis begins with the non-invasive scans, probes that examine the construct without actually touching it, mapping every surface and every internal component in exquisite detail. The armor is measured, its composition and structure recorded down to the molecular level. The weapon systems are analyzed, their firing chambers and ammunition feeds examined to understand how they function. The power core is studied, its fusion reactions observed through sensors that can perceive processes occurring at scales beyond human comprehension. Every bolt, every wire, every component of the machine is catalogued and understood. Then the analysis moves deeper, to the sarcophagus itself and the systems it contains. Here the Crypteks must be more careful, must ensure that their examination does not disturb the delicate balance that keeps the pilot alive. Probes extend, impossibly thin filaments that can slip between armor plates without leaving a trace, that can sample the amniotic fluid without removing enough to matter, that can observe neural activity without interfering with it. The organic component is examined in meticulous detail, every organ catalogued, every system analyzed and understood. What the Crypteks discover is both impressive and tragic. The human who serves as this construct's pilot has been preserved with remarkable skill, given the limitations of Imperial technology. His organic remains are in surprisingly good condition, considering the centuries of service. The life support systems, despite their current failings, have functioned far better than most human technology manages over such time spans. The neural interfaces are crude but effective, providing the pilot with sensory input and motor control that allows him to function as an effective warrior despite his catastrophically limited organic substrate. But the cost of this preservation is evident in every measurement, every reading. The pilot exists in a state of constant pain, nerve endings firing error signals that the stasis systems can only partially suppress. His body, reduced to its essential components, is held together by surgical interventions and mechanical supports that would be considered torture by any reasonable definition. His mind, when awake, must process an overwhelming flood of sensory data filtered through mechanical systems that cannot fully replicate the subtlety of organic perception. And his consciousness, when in stasis, drifts in a void without dreams, without rest, without the mercy of oblivion that true death would provide. One of the Crypteks, a specialist in what the humans would call cybernetics, observes this with something that might be recognition. The Cryptek itself underwent biotransference, experienced the transition from organic existence to mechanical immortality. It remembers, in whatever way memory functions for a being whose consciousness exists as patterns in necrodermis, the horror of awakening in a body that felt nothing, that experienced the universe only through sensors that reduced reality to data streams. It remembers the sense of loss, the desperate yearning for sensations that could never be recovered, the slow adjustment to existing as something fundamentally different from what it had been. The human in this sarcophagus is experiencing something similar, though in reverse. He clings to organic existence, his brain still flesh and blood, still capable of pain and suffering in ways that Necrons can no longer experience. Yet he is separated from his body by the very systems that keep him alive, experiencing the world through sensors and interfaces that can never fully replace the rich sensory input of organic existence. He is trapped between two states of being, neither fully organic nor properly mechanical, a hybrid creature that combines the worst limitations of both forms. The analysis continues for hours by human time measurement, though the cryptechs do not measure duration in such limited terms. They examine every aspect of the construct and its pilot, building a comprehensive understanding of the technology and the biological systems it sustains. They discover the redundancies built into the life support, the backup systems that activate when primary systems fail, the clever solutions to problems that the human engineers clearly did not fully understand. They find evidence of past repairs, places where components have been replaced or modified, suggesting that this particular construct has survived multiple periods of service separated by intervals of stasis. And they discover something else, something that gives even the emotionless cryptechs pause in their analysis. Deep in the neural interfaces, in the systems that connect the pilot's organic brain to the dreadnought's sensors and controls, they find patterns that suggest active mental processes even in stasis. The pilot is not fully unconscious, not completely dormant. Some part of his consciousness remains active, processing information at levels too subtle for the construct's own monitoring systems to detect. He is dreaming,